The point of a school system is to help people get good grades, and when that happens, society is much better off. 4 things in this speech: firstly, a model; secondly, why this will be effective; thirdly, why that is important; and finally, on social outcomes. The model is simply that this would happen within primary and secondary schools, and that students would be separated by their ability to perform academically. So if a child is very clever but can't actually focus and complete the work for a class, they're not going to be placed into that class. And it's going to vary by subject. So if a student is strong in one subject but not another, they'll be separated in those subjects according to their ability. Now, why is this going to be effective for learning? In this point, I'm going to prove that learning is best when we separate students by skill level, and that's because of its effect on firstly teachers and secondly students. So let's talk about why teachers are able to provide better learning. In the status quo, teachers have to set work at lots of different levels within the classroom because students are going to be sorted by age and are all at different skill levels. And also, because children of the same age can vary a lot in terms of maturity, teachers are also juggling lots of different behavioral levels. Now, there might be variation in a child's maturity, but the children in a class are all going to be of the same skill level, which removes one of the variables that teachers have to juggle. This means instead of preparing multiple sets of resources to teach maths to children of very different levels of maths ability, a teacher can produce just one set of material for a class and teach that class that set of material. One assignment to mark, one lecture to prepare. It's much, much easier to do. What that means is they can put more effort into those materials that they do make for a class. Instead of having to make lots of different materials, they can make just one of much higher quality. But also, we think that that's simply less stressful for teachers. It's less work for them to do, and they can feel satisfied knowing they're producing higher quality work. And when teachers are less stressed, they have a more pleasant experience teaching and have more time and energy to look after students, to help keep them engaged in learning and to provide a really good teaching experience. So that's why teachers are able to provide better learning with this model, but we also think students are better able to learn with this model. And there's 3 mechanisms here. The first is that children are not wasting time in classes that are either much too difficult for them, so they're just totally unmotivated, or way too easy for them. So again, they're unmotivated because there's nothing worth them paying attention to. Now kids are in classes at the right skill level and they're better engaged. But secondly, they're in a group of students who are all at the same skill level, which makes it a lot easier to get peer support in terms of study groups, in terms of helping with homework to improve grades. But thirdly, students naturally compete and compare themselves to their classmates. Now those classmates they're comparing themselves to are at the same level of them, and there's a lot of fairer competition happening, and students are not so demoralized by that comparison. But what that means also is when students are competing, it's a fairer competition, which is much more motivational. So because of its effects on teachers and of students, we think that overall this model is going to result in children achieving more, getting better grades in their classes, and that they're going to be more likely to finish high school, to go into further education or training. The second point in this speech then is to explain why that's so important, because the previous point I just gave you a bunch of mechanisms to explain why improved learning. And the reason why opening government is going to win is not just because we provide those mechanisms, but also we explain why that's so important for society. This is a much more foundational and fundamental contribution than any closing team is able to provide. It matters because it's circular. Children who get good grades feel more motivated and work even harder and get even better grades. And what that means is good educational achievement, which we know is a huge determinant of quality of life. If children finish high school, possibly go into further training or education, they're more likely to get better jobs that are well paid. What that means is they can afford good quality housing, they can afford healthcare, and also they can know that they're doing a job which is meaningful, which is more rewarding because it's a satisfying job. That means people are happier and they are healthier. Even if opposition disagrees with some of our mechanisms and reduces the scale of some of them, and we don't get lots of people, for example, going on to university, even if we just are able to show you that more people finish high school having achieved their high school certificate, we're going to get better life outcomes for a huge number of people on a very large scale, and that's only in our worst case scenario. So that is why opening government wins so clearly, because of its effect on individuals, but we also win on an effect on society, right? Because more happy, healthy people is good for society. People who can look after themselves don't need government services like welfare, which means that the state has less costs. People who are working in productive jobs that require higher qualifications result in a more productive economy with a higher GDP, more revenue for the state. And thirdly, we know that people with high levels of education are more engaged in democracy. What that means is we've got a wealthier country with a healthier democracy. That's better for people in society now, but also for all the generations in future. If you accept that even some of that is true, we have a clear victory here over any opposition teams. And also over our closing, who are unlikely to be able to provide anything of the same scale of importance. The final thing I want to talk about is social development here. Obviously, we want children to be happy and developed and like normal socially. The first thing to note here is that children who get good grades get a good self-esteem boost from that, and we think children are likely to be very happy knowing that they've done well. And also, when they go on to the better life that we know that we'll have later on, they're going to be happy and well going forward into the future. But I just want to remove any ability here for opposition to argue that this will be bad for students socially. Importantly, age is not the only determinant of social ability. It's also about maturity, which is correlated with academic ability because both of those things, maturity and academic ability, are the result of brain development. So a kid who's read and understood Lord of the Flies is going to be operating on a different social level to a kid who still prefers books with pictures. Now kids are sorted by people with the same academic ability. There's going to be the chance for them to make friends with people who are interested in topics of the same difficulty and more interested in the world to the same level they are. We think that's very, very positive for social development. And insofar as they still need bonds with kids of the same age who have similar interests or at similar life stages, we think children still have the ability to make friends outside of class. But overall here, we think students who perform well at school and have the ability to meet people with similar interests of them, of different ages and of the same age, are going to be far better off, and society is going to be better off with high educational achievement. Very proud to be opening government.
Two very crucial pieces of framing before I move on to the rebuttals and substantives. Number one, the proposition team is going to require a lot of political and economic capital to restructure the education system from an age-based one to an ability-based one, which means that we on the opposition have the same amount of political and economic capital, and we would rather spend that in hiring better teachers, giving teachers better salaries, providing individuals and students and teachers with better educational materials, which means that we are able to also better the education system under our side. We are able to use and extract better value out of an existing infrastructure that does not require reorganization, but just requires development. And that, to a large extent, addresses a lot of the issues that are coming in from the proposition. Because what the proposition says here is that there are certain problems with the schooling system, or a lot of the problems with the schooling system come from bad teaching, for example. So, for example, a lot of the problems they say with regards to not reaching out to the weakest students or the strongest students, it can be made a more holistic level of teaching if there is enough funding, if we hire better teachers and are able to provide better salaries to teachers. The second piece of very crucial framing, which to a large extent debunks a lot of the issues that the proposition talks about, is the idea that schooling is not just for education. And that's why reorganization on the basis of ability makes no sense, right? Why do we have schooling? Note that if schooling was just for education, then schooling would essentially be a feeder for universities only. But let's step out of our privilege bubbles and realize that vast majority of high school graduates actually do not end up in universities or colleges. It's actually a minority of people that end up in higher education. Why is this so? Because the schooling system was not meant necessarily to be feeder for schools. It was supposed to provide students and children with a few things. Number one, it's supposed to provide them with basic literacy. So essentially the ability to read, write, comprehend information, analyze information, make certain decisions for themselves, whether it be life decisions or political decisions. Number two, emotional development that is incredibly crucial for any child to exist in society and then later become an adult. Number three, social development. So in terms of socialization with their peers, socialization with their teachers, and socialization with their social groups in order to be able to integrate into society as children better. And number four, to provide them with certain skills that they can use later on in order to shape their careers. And this career does not necessarily need to be a white collar career. It can be even like being someone who has a vocational training and then goes for technical work on that field in particular. Why is this so very important? This is so very important because you realize that the whole point of the schooling system is not to give you just an education based learning or something with regards that has to do with subject and courses, but rather a holistic learning where you develop completely as a human being. Because in society, you go to school for a huge amount of time, your parents sacrifice that time by like sending you to school and not spending that amount of time with you. Your parents pay money oftentimes to send you to private schools. Your parents, or at least taxpayers fund the schools in order to ensure these goals that happen, which means that a sole focus on educational ability is a wrong approach de facto to begin with when it comes to schooling. And that defeats a lot of the arguments coming in from the proposition. Because what you realize is that the age based model is not an outdated one, but it is indeed a rational one. Why is this true? We'll give you a few reasons which will act both as a substantive but also able to counter a lot of the framing coming in from the proposition because it explains why an age based model is necessary. Why is age so very defining and important? And here, I think a very important clarification is what the proposition said is that we cannot like defend repeats or we cannot defend people dropping classes. We think these happen in extenuating circumstances. Usually, the curriculum is designed such that if you get like 51%, you get to go to a level above. And very few people fail to do that, which means that sometimes there will be a plus minus one, but in the vast majority of the cases, we will have an age-based system, which is pretty much the status quo anyways. There are some people who will probably be slightly slower. That's a very minority of people, very small group of people. We think we can accommodate for that within our system. That's not an issue. But why really is age important here? Number one, because age is important in terms of biological development of your brain. Now, they can claim a lot of things. Some people get smarter easily. Some people become very high skilled, have very high ability at a very low age, and the reverse is true for certain other groups, right? However, biological development is a fact that is true for the vast majority of children, which means that they particularly grow at a particular pace and their brain particularly grow at particular paces. So even if there are certain parts of their brain that can be developed, there are other parts of the brain that are responsible for other kinds of intelligence. So obviously, like aptitudinal intelligence is one aspect of your brain. There are other aspects of your brain. So for example, emotional intelligence. For example, other kinds of intelligence that has to do more with socialization with people, which means that it's important. The age in and of itself is something that is used as a parameter. Number two, socialization. It's just true that it's easier to socialize with people your age. Now, under their system, there's obviously a possibility that you are in class with someone who is like 3 years younger than you or 3 years older than you. Literally, the age that we're living in, an age of fast-paced technology, where you see TikTok, where you see different cartoons or different trends coming up, it's very difficult to relate with someone who is 2 or 3 years older than you. Maybe when you grow up and become an adult, it's possible, but as a kid, it's very difficult to make that connection, which means that it hampers your ability to socialize to a large extent. Number three, we already use age-based metrics in our society. Even if someone is super smart, we still don't allow them the ability to vote before the age of 18 because we have used 18 as a benchmark for gaining forms of rationality that are quite important. Now, why is all of this then important? It's important to understand a few things. Emotional connections, having the maturity and having the ability to have fun in social connections almost always depend on your age. And in these circumstances, obviously, it's better to have age-based connections within the schooling system because with what we want is a more holistic development of that child that is not dependent only on their educational performance, but on their performance in terms of connection with people, their performance in terms of socialization, the fact that they're developing their other skills. Why is it that a school-based system under their side is far worse? Because under their side, the school-based system is entirely focused on educational ability development and nothing else. In those cases, it is more likely that you would not pay attention to your weakest child because your biggest achievement there or your biggest priority there is developing students with ability, because that's the focus of the entire education system, because that's how the entire education system is reorganized and reordered. We think it's far worse under their side when it comes to underprivileged kids who do not have access to private tutoring, private schools, etc. Under our world, we get to use all of the money that they're using to reorganize the education system to make our education system a better one, but it stays a holistic one. Schooling is not just for the privileged, it's for everyone. Incredibly proud to oppose.